Hello, welcome to this mini webinar briefing on What You Told Us, a research project carried out by Nottinghamshire Educational Psychology Service to identify children and young people's thoughts and experiences of school during the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Working alongside other local authority educational psychology services, Nottinghamshire EPS circulated in November and December 2020 a questionnaire to primary pupils and secondary pupils across Nottinghamshire. This was sent out directly to schools and also shared widely on social media channels to ensure children who may be educated other than at school were able to participate. We had over 1,200 responses, with 2/3 of those responses coming from primary age children. Half of the primary age responses were from children in Year 5 and Year 6, but we'd like to thank all parents, carers, teachers, teaching assistants, and everybody who was instrumental in supporting a child or young person in completing the questionnaire. The questionnaire was formulated and asked questions about children's feelings about school, what they would like to see differently in school, their responses to the COVID pandemic and measures that had taken place in school, and also their feelings about exams and preparation for school. The data yielded was both quantitative and qualitative in nature. The quantitative data was factual, which year group the child was in, as well as numerical due to the use of Likert scale questions. A Likert scale is where a rating is given on a scale to answer a question. In the questionnaire, all scales are 1 to 5. For example, children were asked their feeling on returning to school, with 1 being not worried, 5 being very worried. All of the quantitative data and the associated outcomes, displayed as both pie charts and bar charts, are available in the accompanying reports, one available for primary and one available for secondary. The qualitative data was analysed using a thematic analysis method. This was completed and key themes related to education experience were identified. There was no difference in terms of the themes between primary and secondary responses, although there was a more significant emphasis on the impact of exams on anxiety and emotional well-being for secondary pupils. Further analysis of the qualitative data identified changes which pupils in Nottinghamshire would like for their education to enable its accessibility. This slide outlines the changes which children and young people in Nottinghamshire identified that they would like for their education. Overwhelmingly, the request was for school to be more fun and more enjoyable, linked really closely with more choice over subjects and topics studied. Lots of children went into a lot of lovely detail about the things and the topics they'd enjoyed, lots of talk about enjoying World War I, World War II, but how they'd like to know more about other things in terms of British history. Children requested increased opportunities for creative work and for their perception that creative topics needed to be seen equally as important as more traditional academic subjects and learning. Children wanted their opinion to be asked for in schools more so that they're able to participate, and for there to be more practical activities. Less use of PowerPoint presentations was frequently requested. There was a lot of discussion about the pace of lessons, with the overwhelming request to be that lessons slow down as they're too quickly paced with too much content, and a number, particularly secondary age pupils, identified that they felt that there was an increase in content due to the lockdown that had taken place in spring-summer 2020 and no face-to-face learning taking place. There was a request for more online learning, particularly around the use of homework, and then how actually there needed to be more areas and more space for people who were struggling with their emotional health, where they could go without necessarily having to have permission or access to that. There was a specific request for more frequent break times and more unstructured times to give that opportunity for spending time with friends. Friends and the importance of friendships was a key theme throughout all of the data. There's requests or changes were around more individualised learning support for when a learner doesn't understand something, and more celebration and recognition of positive behaviour in school, particularly for learners who felt that they do well always the time and aren't necessarily praised and recognised. The following themes were identified in both the primary and the secondary responses. So firstly, positive experiences of school and learning, negative experiences of school and learning, emotional well-being, the importance of relationships, feelings of safety, anxiety related to exams, and the impact of inequality. In terms of the positive experiences of learning, over 80% of respondents across the 1,226 responses were positive about their school experience. And many of them provided us with very specific examples, but what became evident was both the subject and the topic is crucial in terms of engaging children in their learning. Education was seen as valuable and learning as essential, something that was needed by children and young people in order to succeed and fulfil their potential and their ambitions. What was evident is that a range of factors which affect learning both positively and negatively, some of those are linked to the themes below. So, for example, the anxiety related to exams became a negative factor in terms of experience of learning. By the same token, selecting subjects, options at year 9 onwards, and selecting that and being able to make that choice was a positive experience and a protective factor for children's learning. The majority of the responses that were negative or identified negative experiences of school and learning came from secondary learners, and the key factors in these were workload, stress related to workload, and an increased workload as a response to the COVID lockdowns which had taken place in spring and summer 2020, and having to take subjects which were seen as pointless. So actually having that very real engagement and understanding of the reason for the learning is crucial to ensure that children are receiving a positive experience of learning. In terms of negative experiences, comments such as bad, draining or dull were frequently repeated. Emotional well-being has been identified as its own theme, but links explicitly with the rest of the themes, particularly the positive experience of school, the importance of relationships, and clearly anxiety related to exams. Confidence and the impact of struggling at school or struggling with learning or relationships issues on confidence came up frequently, and so therefore it's not just about children's emotional well-being on its own, but also their feelings of self-worth and their identification of themselves as a learner. In terms of relationships, it was overwhelmingly positive. Over 92% of responses about relationships were positive, and what was really lovely in the responses were names of individual staff members and even friends who made a difference and made school a really positive place for children and young people to be. It was really lovely to read. The importance of friendship came through clearly, but also the importance of calm, empathetic staff who really value their relationship with their children and know them personally, whatever their age, whether primary or secondary. What came out as a negative in terms of the importance of relationships was the impact of COVID and how the bubble system has meant that the social world in schools, particularly primaries, become much smaller for children. And that feeling, the feelings of loss, the feelings of loss of friendships, the feelings of loss of relationships, not just with adults as well as other children, came through clearly, and this is what's led to the Little Elf story, The Little Elf and His Forever Friends, which is a psychology service we've written to share with children to help support them with these feelings. The fifth theme that was identified was their feeling of safety, and overwhelmingly, yes, I think we only had 2 responses that were negative in terms of overarching feelings of safety in school. But there was also that recognition of the importance of COVID measures, and what sums up really the responses around safety is this quote: "For me, school is the safest place to be." In terms of the theme of anxiety related to exams, this was very much secondary specific, and it's really important to note that this questionnaire was completed and also circulated prior to the announcements from the government about the arrangements for exams in 2021. Therefore, this data is very much of its time and needs to be considered in that time. The key elements that were identified by the young people who responded, though, was the loss of time, the concerns about never having sat an exam before, the lack of preparation, and whether the content of the curriculum would actually be covered. And finally, the 7th theme that was identified was the impact of inequality on educational experience. Again, this was skewed towards secondary, and although personal experiences from all the respondents were very, very different, there was common threads in the fact that the children and young person who'd responded felt unsupported. They felt unsupported by school staff, and on many occasions they felt that school had minimised their own experience or the experience they were feeling. Now that the project's been completed, what next? So a report has been written which will be shared with schools and other stakeholders, detailing the themes that were identified and also the changes that Nottinghamshire pupils shared that they would like. The hope is that this will inform the planning discussions that take place between Nottinghamshire EPs and schools at Springboard meetings in autumn 2021. We've also written the third story in the Little Elf series, Little Elf and His Forever Friends, which is a therapeutic story focusing on the loss of relationships and changes in school which have taken place. This is aimed primarily at primary pupils. Thank you very much for listening. The reports that are referenced throughout this webinar are available on the East Midlands Education Support Service website. And if you have any questions or comments about the Pupil Voice project, then please email us on epstraining@notcc.gov.uk. Thank you.